Hello, Daniel Hummerdal.
Hello, Heather. It is so nice to see you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to be my first guest on this podcast. I was so grateful that you said yes, and that you also said that I could have some technical issues, that it wouldn't matter.
Well, fingers crossed that they will be minor, but so far so good. Well done on setting this up. It's my pleasure to be your first. So, greetings from Brisbane, Australia, where it's now 8:05 at night. The kids have gone to bed, and I got a little bit of me time. Well, you time, I guess. There we go.
Brilliant. Well, that is dedication. You're working into the evening to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it. So, Daniel, I want to start out by saying that I've been a long time admirer of your work. We met, it must be about 10 years ago now, when you were involved in the Safety Differently program. And I remember, first of all, hearing John Green speak about it, and then going to a couple of your workshops. And I think one of them was on appreciative investigation, which I really, really enjoyed. It felt like a completely refreshing way of looking at safety. And one of the things I want to say, you've written a new book, and I have read it, and it is called An Invitation to Safety Conversations. And one of the things I want to say to you is that what I really loved about it is that it is so accessible. And I noticed that some of what we do in safety um, is hidden behind an enigma wrapped in a riddle. That's just for me, right? This is me, not you. You might not see it that way, but that's the way it occurs for me. And I wonder if you've talked a lot in your book about the requirement to kind of lose ego and be courageous, and that it's about curiosity, and that we don't have the answers. And I'm wondering whether sometimes I know myself, I can fall into this trap, whether sometimes we hide behind expertise and complexity in order to almost justify our roles.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. If it's expertise or ego or whatever it is, but I do think that we are ourselves the biggest obstacle to great conversations, to greater learning, greater insight. We get in our own way too often. So sometimes it's expertise that we think we know the answers, we think we know the sites, the technology, the equipment, the processes. So it's more difficult to be curious, to put what you already know within parentheses and still ask the new question to a new person who's experiencing something unique, and just welcome another perspective. Allow yourself to be challenged, allow yourself to be surprised, try new questions. I mean, there's a there is an unlimited list of questions we can ask. It's just up to your imagination how much you want to be surprised. And so if you feel like you've run out of curiosity, it's not because you have mastered the environment you're in. It says something about you rather than the environment where you are. But that being said, being new to a site, being a naive explorer, which I often end up being when I go to site, because as a consultant, I often get invited to new environments where I don't know. I have to be more curious. I have to be more humble because I'm not the expert. So it sort of comes with the territory to some degree as well.
But you have been an academic, haven't you? Isn't that the way that you've done some academic work in this field? No.
Yeah, I've done a fair bit of studies around this. I trained to become a psychologist, and of course
Yeah.
that in itself, 5 years of studying psychology, and a big chunk of that is actually around having different types of conversations. There's a clinical block, there's a organizational things, it's educational, it's child psychology, and of course conversation is the likelihood the main tool for the many helping professions, but psychologists in particular, perhaps.
Yeah, that does make sense. I can see that actually. I mean, for me, I guess it's an ongoing struggle. Like I really feel it as an ongoing struggle. Like the need to demonstrate my expertise when I go into an organization. Obviously, I'm a
Mm.
consultant and a trainer, and I feel much more comfortable in the role as trainer, rather than facilitator, because I feel that I'm demonstrating my value, I'm providing knowledge, and I feel there's a kind of an evolution that we can undertake as individuals where we can get comfortable with the fact we don't need to show that all the time. Is that, have you consciously worked on that, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. Both in training sessions, but also in how I open up conversations. There is a story in the book where I'm sort of one of the first experience I had here in Australia, being dropped onto a construction site,
Oh,
hanging out with
yes.
a
I
group
was going to
of
refer to that. Yeah.
a group of construction workers, and me being fairly fresh off the boat from Sweden, working in the head office, looking more European than a blokey construction type in the middle of nowhere. I sensed there was a huge gap, and all of my colleagues encouraged me to try to fit in. They said, wash your PPE shirt multiple times, let it go in the tumble dryer a whole day so it looks a bit worn. Drag your new hard hat in the sand so it looks used. Wear your boots for weeks before, because otherwise they will never take you seriously. And of course, I arrived with, you could see the creases on the shirt when I sat down, and the hard hat was so shiny. So of course, I had to express my lack of expertise, my lack of knowledge about what actually happened on site. I'm Daniel. I'm from Sweden. I work in safety. I work at the head office in Brisbane. I have no idea what it's like to work here, and that broke the ice. They loved it. They absolutely loved it. It was a moment of vulnerability, perhaps, or a moment of a little bit, taking yourself not too seriously, but still being curious enough. I want to understand what it's like to work here, and
Mm.
that was all that it took for me to be approved, and that we could sort of ask all kinds of questions or explore them together after that. But going back, I just want to address your training situation there, because it's something that I do a fair bit of as well. And I see some trainers that they start their days by spending 10 minutes talking about their own CV as a sort of way to give expertise or license to be the expert, really. And I have stopped doing that. I may have done that initially, because the way you get a license to talk to people about what they do is to talk about what's relevant to them. If you find the frequency where people are, the questions they're dealing with, and you say interesting things about that, you become a trusted advisor very quickly, regardless of, there's certain things that are good to know that make sense. Like, I have a bit of an accent. Um, it's obviously something to do with me being from Sweden. I trained to become a pilot. I trained to be a psychologist. These things help people to make sense of me, but there's no point in trying to convince people. If I can't talk to them in a relevant way, then it doesn't matter what I've done before. So just trusting that sort of people will figure out your level of expertise quite quickly, I find.
Right. I haven't ever considered it quite that way, because I guess I have come from a perspective that, influencing is partly based on establishing credibility, isn't it? So how do you establish credibility? And I'm saying this not just for myself, but I think this is relevant to safety professions in general. Safety professional in general is like, if I don't understand, if I can't provide you with advice and expertise, how do I establish that credibility?
Yeah, I think there are a few different foundations for credibility. Of course, being the technical expert on whatever subject matter you have is one of those foundations. If you have a lot of detailed knowledge, a lot of nuanced models and frameworks, and you can explain things and so on, that gives you credibility. If you're an authority on the very, in the area where you are, if you're the authority in the organization, you sit higher up the food chain, you get credibility as well, even though you may not be the technical expert. But then the third thing that I want to talk about here, which I hinted about before, is really where you are and this is a lot of new leaders, they have to lead more senior people sometimes without, with being lesser of an expert, sometimes having lesser authority. Uh, and my advice to them is, well, you lead by coaching. You're saying, okay, we got a
Mm.
process here. Help me understand this process. What is good? What is difficult? What gets in the way? What are your ideas? And just tease out the knowledge. You become the host, the convener of the knowledge that sits in the room. And that takes a
Mm.
particular skill. And when you become that sort of sounding board for the knowledge that people have, it's their expertise. You make them sound good, feel good about themselves, and they will probably leave the day feeling that they were the smartest person in the room, having contributed to the many other people there. And I think if you can be that sounding board box of resonance for them, it gives you another level of credibility, or not necessarily another level, but another type of credibility to have
Mm.
nuanced, interesting conversations with people as well, without being the technical expert.
Right. It's fascinating to see how far we've come. So I've been in some way part of this profession for 35 years now. And when I started, um, everybody, it was all about a technical skill set. And it was generally older men, and there was generally a lot of clipboards and no's and checklists, and it was highly technical as a profession. And obviously, what we've seen is this move towards influencing softer skill, what we call softer skills, but actually really hard, aren't they? They're harder than the technical stuff. Um, is there still place for the technical knowledge, the technical skill set?
Absolutely. And I think this is the, I want to make a case for the diversity of leadership foundations, if anything, here. The technical skills in safety, knowing about hazards and controls, if you focus on that aspect of it, and having good knowledge about how to solve different technical problems, it's fantastic. But there are many problems in safety that are not technical, that are human adaptive challenges about how should we prioritize different things, how should we relate to each other, which mindset is better to have in a low intense situation versus a high intense situation. These are, mindset questions. They're value questions, and it doesn't matter what your technical expertise is. You can't tease out the right answer, because the right answer is sort of expires as soon as you have it. You need to tackle it constantly, and you need a different leadership skill set to deal with creativity, to deal with values, and those type of challenges that are as real as the technical challenges that we have. So it's sort of an adaptive answer to your question.
Okay, yeah.
I don't want to sort of swing the pendulum so far to say, no, all we need now is sort of the softer human skills, and let's forget about the technical thing. But I do think, but both come with limitations. It is good to be mindful of that when we choose and actually have different skill sets available in our organizations as well.
It's interesting because I suppose for me, it has felt like a an evolution in the profession and a personal evolution as well, in the sense that I believe that it is, rightly or wrongly, there feels to me like a superiority in being a facilitator that draws knowledge out than being an expert that transmits knowledge. And I'm wondering whether anybody can make that shift.
Hmm. I What comes to mind is a story I heard down in Christchurch, New Zealand, quite a few years ago now, where they were really believing in this sort of softer skills, leaders being hosts and not heroes. So they were consulting on pretty much everything, and which led to the workforce, kept saying, they arrived at this point where the workforce said, "We understand what you're doing. It's nice, but can't you just make up your mind on these questions? Do you have to come to us every time to ask for guidance about how to solve these things? These are simple questions. You can sort this out. We want to be involved with certain questions, but not all questions." And it really became a really much more nuanced conversation rather than one approach will solve everything.
So it's situational, then, is what you're saying.
I guess it is situational. And it's dynamic as well, because
Yeah.
what was the right approach yesterday may not be the right approach today or tomorrow. So yeah, it feels like we need to just think about what the right. I think it was the academic escapes me here now, but the quote goes something like that: the right approach to leadership depends on what the problem is that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Start with the problem rather than start with a solution that is looking for a problem to solve. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Okay. No, that makes sense. So I mentioned to you when we discussed chatted before that obviously there's a lot for me in what you're talking about when it comes to safety conversations, which resonates very strongly when it comes to well-being conversations as well. And actually, I particularly liked a section in the book where I actually hadn't thought about it, but I think it is something I'm going to add in, which is your how you arrive. I love that. I mean, I have something called approach in my model, but it's more a question of, you know, of adapting your approach to the individual and your relationship and that sort of thing. But this, I think, is really interesting in terms of that almost you've won or lost the conversation in terms of how you're actually approaching that space, isn't it? But what I actually wanted to ask you about was um, you're obviously um, you're talking about workplace frustrations and you're talking about solving workplace operational issues. And you've talked about relationships and things like that. But I'm wondering whether you don't think there's a missed opportunity in exploring the human at the same time. What's going on for you, what's going on in your life right now, it because that it came very strongly for me with frustrations at work as opposed to necessarily how am I doing. Is there an opportunity to bring those conversations together, do you think?
Absolutely. I think it's many time a necessary conversation. It's something that comes up in conversations because if you start with just wanting to understand people at work, what they're experiencing, and they will lead you to whatever source of frustrations or delight that might be going on in their life at the moment. If it's impacting work, it's going to come up.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work I've been doing here in Australia has been in very remote areas where there's a fly in, fly
Mm.
out, where people live in camps
Yeah.
for a couple of weeks. They work long days. They go to camp, they eat dinner, they go to bed, and they go to back to the mines the next day, and so on.
Mm.
And they want to talk about what happens at camp, but they want to talk about how they're removed from their families, how they're worried about, they might be going through a divorce, or they have a suicidal teenager at home, and they are there. All these things is what they're sitting with while driving a big truck in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
It's this sort of holistic experience of work, and it takes you to these amazing stories of what people go
Yeah.
through while being at work. And of course it impacts people on so many levels. And my job becomes about, okay, where's the boundary here about what can the organization support and what can they do around these things. But in the
Mm.
first instance, it's more around just making the organization more aware that these are
Yeah.
things that are happening. um,
Interesting. I know another synergy that I noticed, which I also, when I train people, I see a huge amount of discomfort with, is that we're not there to fix and solve. And it, even when we've done the training and people are practicing with actors, the forum theatre, it's immediately where they go to. And I think that comes down to something that you also talk about in the book, which is the discomfort of not being able to fix the problem. It's discomfort with other people's emotions, discomfort with just the whole um, the fixing thing.
hmm.
So, what's your view on that?
Well, my of course we want to fix things. It's a helping profession in many ways. We want to look after people. We want to, we might be overreaching if anything in that aspect. So I think my coaching advice for the leaders that sort of step into this is that don't jump to solutions, right? Don't
Mm.
jump to the fix. Try to understand. The more you understand the problem, the more sustainable your solution is going to be in the end. So it's not a question of stopping people fixing. It's more about suspending the urge to fix. Let
Okay.
it come
Okay.
later.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
will have the license to fix things, but make
Yes.
sure that
Yes.
you have, more stories, more variables, more dimensions to this issue that people are facing before you start fixing it. So you actually solve the right problem.
Absolutely. I really hear that. I mean, it's for me, if you jump into solution mode too quickly, you're actually damaging the relationship sometimes, and you're doing it because of your own discomfort as opposed to really teasing out what have they tried. You're not hearing it all from them, are you necessarily? And there can be so many things that we're not aware of that the person, is aware of, that we can start to tease out with the right questions.
And
So
just
yeah.
have a little bit empathy with the people who are in the position, because occasionally in a conversation that I'm in, I might hear something where I actually have a solution. I have read something. I have an article for that. I have, on a different site, they did something else around that. And this little, it's so convenient. It's such a neat fit. Here's a problem piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and I got another piece. And of course you want to provide it because it's right there. It feels good to be the expert in that. That urge to fix, to give something soothing, helping immediately is very strong. It's almost
Mm,
impossible to stop yourself in that moment. Uh, but if we do, their story stops there. It becomes you start shifting information to go from you. You start signaling what matters, and people become students again. So it sort of ruins some of that conversational work that you've done, or it risks ruining
yeah.
the
Yeah.
setup that you worked quite hard to create.
And they can own the solution then as well, can't they? It's something that you've co-created in a sense.
This is so.
So
The replacement is well, replacement is a strong word, but I encourage people to have the same conversational approach to solutions as they have to understanding the problem. So, what do you think needs to happen now? Right? Invite people into the problem solving space and do that with people rather than thinking, okay, you just tell us what the problem are and we will solve that for you, which is, a nice supportive thing to do. But I think people want to be part of the solution as well as, providing insights around the problem. And a lot of people have ideas. They have things they've been thinking about. They want to try. They may not be perfect. Hence there's a chapter on possibility conversation, which is sort of
yeah, yeah.
an it was a friend of ours that encouraged me to write a specific chapter. Especially the coaching advice was that the safety profession is mostly thinking about the status quo. How do we keep everything fit? But this is about opening up that. What if we actually change the system rather than making people comply with the current system? What if we change the hardware, the procedure, some of the the skill sets that's available? What becomes available then is very exciting, and I think it's a ripe area to step into for a lot of people.
And you've got a lot of success stories throughout the book, haven't you? Ones where, for example, somebody was doing something that would have been deemed incredibly unsafe, and yet you looked at it and said, "How could we make this way of doing it safe?" Because it was inconvenient, and they were doing things that were, basically they were short circuiting a system that didn't really work, and so you made that way safe for them. And lots of other stories throughout the book. I guess what kept coming up for me though is that a lot of problems in organisations are already kind of known about, and they're known about, and nobody does anything about them, and they
Yes,
don't lift up the carpet very often because they feel intractable.
yes,
Maybe they're really difficult to solve, or maybe the person that's trying to solve them doesn't have the level of responsibility to be able to solve them. And I think in large organizations, particularly, there can be some real intractable problems. Have you come across scenarios like that? And what do you recommend one does in that situation?
yeah. I think in every organization I've been, that's an issue. It's I sometimes I don't know how to react really because I in some of the work that I've done, I collect a lot of stories and I present them back to the organization, and I ask for a validation or a assessment of how real is what I'm saying, how fair is this picture that I'm giving back to you, this reflection I'm holding up. And people say, oh, it's 10 out of 10. It's perfect. This is exactly it. All right. So how surprised are you to hear what I'm saying? Not at all. There's no surprise. So why does it feel like we're talking about the most important thing ever? The nerve in the room is like people are at the edge of their seat. And this is, and and I think the what happens through the work that I do, and many other people do as well, is that when we capture what people say, when we write it down, when we turn it into black on white, we give it a official formal format, it becomes real. Up
Yeah.
until that,
Yeah.
it just floats around as someone's opinion or hearsay. It's not a real artifact, but
Yeah.
having someone coming in and holding up, hey, I spoke to your people, they told me this happened to them, and they told me this story, and then this example, and it gets real. One of my good friends, he's a discovery agent in a large national railway organization. All he does is he's traveling around talking to train drivers about, in particular, signals past a danger, which is a big thing for them. They want to understand this, want to get on top of it. And he collects the stories from train drivers about everything that is impacting their work. Once a month, he goes and he sits down with the board of the railway organization and he tells them these, relatively unfiltered stories. They're filtered through him, obviously, but it bypasses all the other social fabric or metrics of the organization. So the board is sort of eating out of his hand. He just tell us more, tell us more. And he told me not too long ago that the fascinating thing is that every time it ends in the same way, and they say, we're so grateful that you're telling us this. It really helps us understand the intractable problems that our people face, the risks, the intervention that we put in place many years ago, how are they showing up today? But we kind of wish that you hadn't told us. Because now
Because
we
we
sit
can't do anything about it.
Well, now they sit with a bigger, more difficult problem, right? Now
Exactly.
now
Yeah.
you have this responsibility to actually do something with this sort of the burden of knowing that things are not perfect. Things are actually uncertain, messy. There's problem created elsewhere that ends up with this poor bugger driving a train in the end. So the point, just going back to your question, yes, it's happening everywhere, and having mechanisms to get people in decision-making positions, but pretty much anywhere to have new ways of understanding themselves, to develop a greater tolerance for their own reality is what I talk about in the book. You need to become a bit more undisciplined in your channels because your channels will filter things for you. They will, the signals that are really strong at the cold face, the shop floor, whatever you call it, when they reach the boardroom, it's going to
Yeah. I
be
like that.
quite a different
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Yeah.
vague. It's going to be generic or conceptual or numbers, statistical. But if you get these sort of stories that are coming through, you can combine them. I'm not saying forget about your metrics. I'm saying come up with new ways of understanding yourself. If it's about using discovery agents, inviting more people in, or having this sort of undercover boss type concept going on where you go out and do a day in the shoes of, there's lots of way of combining the social fabric anew. And that's what I want to encourage with this book. Go out, be curious, learn about yourself.
Yeah. It is interesting actually because I recognize a lot of what you're saying there. I've done two projects recently that this really resonates. So I've been doing some safety culture work in Belgium because I speak French, so I got kind of given this work to do, and it's been a massive learning experience. You can imagine Belgium safety things that I'm not necessarily used to, but I what you're saying really resonates. A lot of these problems were known about, and having me come in and tell the stories and talk to people and then present back to them has actually meant that there is now an emphasis on solutions using the workforce to create those solutions. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is I do a lot of psychosocial risk assessment work, and you can do a survey and it doesn't really tell you a huge amount until you
Mm,
sit down with people and say, okay, it says here emotional demands are an issue here. what do you mean when I say emotional? What does that mean to you? What, and then you hear about a commercial decision which has impacted on them and there's been no people impact assessment beforehand. And, they've had aggression from customers since, and you're like, okay. And then you can take that back. And then because you take it to a level which it isn't normally heard at, then things start to shift. And it might be slow, but you get action in the right areas. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
it is. The funny thing that has happened, if you get to do this over time in an organization, it develops an appetite with people. They want to know more. They say, okay,
Mm,
you give them a special, unique access to the human texture of work. What's the impact of the decisions that they make? How does that show up? So, in some places, when I get to go to different sites and I produce a report, when that report comes to the chief executive, he's just hungry to learn more and to get these stories. A bit like my friend in the railway company, right? It's I think just going back to something you said there, which is when we get a chance to sit down with someone, the meaning of work is fairly untidy. We have
mm,
to figure out what it means. When we produce something in a tidy report and it shows up as a graph, it looks so well packaged. But when
yeah,
you dig a
yeah,
little bit beyond that, it's ambiguous. It's fairly sort of fuzzy or unclear what people are dealing with, what it means. Is it noise? Is it signal? And it's a different sort of work, but it's also more people get more invited into that perspective.
yeah,
A story from frontline is sort of okay. What happened before that? Where did it go after? What happened with it?
yeah,
It sucks people in a way that stats never can. I think. Not the way I've seen stats. I'm not a stats
yeah,
expert, to be candid.
yeah. No, I'm not either. I work with people who do that far better than I do. I'm better at the engagement work. But we've done 32 minutes, and I said it would be half an hour, but I
Oh
didn't
yeah.
want to leave without asking you a final question. So, even in the last 10 years since I met you, Daniel, there's been so many iterations in this safety conversation. When I say the safety conversation, I mean the conversation about safety, as opposed to your book about safety conversations. So, we were talking safety differently, safety two,
Hmm.
and then was HOP, and now there's energy safety,
Ha.
and
What's next?
I
Right? What's your question?
well,
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to ask you is what's next, and for me also, and I'm going to put another little piece in there too. It feels to me like we're on kind of ever decreasing circles with safety while we completely ignore occupational health, which is killing way more people
Sure.
than accidents at work. So
Okay.
that's a two-pronged question,
Yes,
I
it
guess,
is.
to leave you with.
Well, just to sort of combine the two safety conversations here, when you read my book, if I can ask you a question, what
Yeah.
labels did you see in the book?
I didn't see that. Well, I saw some. I saw some appreciative conversations. I
Oh,
saw
yeah.
some
But
labels around
none of
different types of
those
conversations,
safety
but I didn't see,
labels, they completely washed
hop.
out.
No.
No, I
Yeah.
don't talk about hope.
Exactly.
I don't talk about safety differently or the energy model or
Yeah.
behavior-based safety. I do
No.
think safety conversations is something that sits for everyone in there. I'm
Yeah.
not interested
Yeah.
in these labels. I'm interested in the practices, what works, and all that. I'm too tired of who is the
Yeah.
best school of thought. I have been in that trench war, and I'm done with it.
Yes.
So I don't
Yes.
even want to know what comes next. I don't care. I'm not going to be part of it. I do my own thing
Yeah.
now, and I hope it
Yeah.
resonates with people from all schools of life and all schools of safety that are much more comfortable in that space. Now, the second question, which is it's something that comes up occasionally. First of all, I think it's much easier to look for these sort of almost cause and effect,
Yeah.
immediate impact on work,
Yeah.
the things that show up slowly in people's bodies, if it's about exposure to vibration or chemicals or whatever. It's trickier to just get to. And it's often, surprising people 20 years after they stopped working or moved on from where they were. So it is just from a knowledge base, more difficult thing to get to. Of course, if you have more expertise, you know what you're looking for, and you can certainly get to it. Occasionally, it comes up of people working in very dusty work environments, and I was talking to people on a coal mine site, and because I was walking around with them, and it's coal dust everywhere, and I said, "How is this impacting you?" He said, "Yeah, well, I don't know, but when I come home at night and I have a shower and I might blow my nose, it's just black stuff that comes out." I said, "It doesn't sound good. Has anyone checked up on these levels? Are they okay?" And this every workplace is full of mysteries, and when you see the clues or the something to pick up on, of course, it can be explored. It is, yeah. I think all of us would be helped with a bit more better understanding, really, about what to look out for. And it
Mm.
is the silent killer, and it's much bigger than these catastrophic events in pretty much every country.
Is it that it's because it's seen as a separate discipline? And I think what you're saying there is
Mm.
actually if there was some more general education for safety professionals and what to look out for, would that
Yeah,
be helpful?
of course it would be, of course, and I think it's not only in safety professional. I think our GPs could be more educated around some of these health things, because people show up there saying, "I'm not feeling too well," but what do you work with? What should they be aware of to look for? The whole system should help each other to sort of assess what should. I think there's an opportunity
Yeah,
there anyway.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed your book, An Invitation to Safety Conversations, Real Dialogue, Better Work.
Yes.
There you go. Yes, you've got it
It's
there in front
good.
of you. And
Good.
I've got it with my post-it
It's
notes in it.
fantastic. Good. I love
um,
this. The post-it notes in it. Well done.
well, a few choice quotes that I enjoyed actually,
Yeah.
which I really found really resonated with me. So, yeah,
Good.
thank you so much for joining us, Daniel.
My
And
pleasure.
yeah, I look forward to seeing what you're going to do off the back of this. I'm sure you're going to be doing a lot of work with organisations, and I look forward to some case studies.
That's good. Thank you so much for having me, Heather. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye bye.